pick up my snoring.
I'm leaving that in. Many of you may be shocked that we haven't had this next guest on the podcast yet, and we are very excited to have Steve Schoch with us. You may know him as architect extraordinaire. You may know him as the previous and the current church council chair. What else would people know you for, Steve? I've only been around for so long.
Well, since Ted Robb left, I'm the second. I'm now the tallest person in the church.
Tallest person in the church.
I couldn't do that when Ted was around.
At one point, did you lead Barnabas class at one point?
Yes.
Led Barnabas class.
Been a teacher there.
Trustee chair.
Trustee chair.
Been on SPR. Yeah. There's probably not a place in the church or a position that I haven't had something to do with.
Incredible.
Missions chair at one time.
Incredible. And
been to prison a lot.
In and out of prison multiple times all over the country. We don't need to give any more context for that in the rest of the episode. But I know that even with all of those positions you've held here, you didn't grow up here, going to church here, right?
That's correct.
And so take us back to little boy Steve Schoch. Where was it? What happened? What was your life?
Well, I'm not from South Jersey. I'm from North Jersey, a town called Hackensack, which is a great place to be from. That means you're not there anymore. And actually, when I went away to college in Pittsburgh, where Linda and I met, one thing I vowed was I was never coming back to New Jersey. And, God has a way of mocking things like that and planting you right back here in New Jersey, although it's a southern part of the state. So in Hackensack, I grew up. My family went to the local Presbyterian church, and that's what we did. I'm an ordained elder in the Presbyterian church.
Oh, yeah?
So, and when Linda and I, she graduated and moved here to South Jersey with me, we attended the Collingswood Presbyterian church before coming here to the Methodist church. And there I was on their session, their version of church council, and in charge of property. And that building now is currently, as we speak, being converted to apartment units.
Yeah, how about that? It's been something to be here over these last few years and watch multiple churches close down, and that one's becoming condos. The Lutheran Church has become a preschool.
The Embury Church towards Camden, that this church planted many years ago, is now a karate studio.
Yeah.
Francis Childs, which is down on the corner of Collins and the White Horse. That's no longer a Methodist church, but it's still a church. It's still a church.
Yeah. Similarly, or a fellowship community. It's interesting to watch that happen in a community.
Yeah, and you mentioned that I was an architect, and one of the things I do is I do a lot of urban design and planning and things like that. And it's always interesting and somewhat sad that when we do new community planning, urban planning, we're not planning churches. They're just not in the program. And when you look at the historic fabric of places like Collingswood, Haddonfield, others, you see these neighborhoods and dotted in and around them, just like ours on the corner of Park and Dayton, is this community institution. And we just don't do that anymore. We put houses where houses go. We put commercial where it goes. And we like to put everything in this little box. It's not the way it used to be.
Yeah.
I want to go all the way back to Hackensack. I know you're happy to have left, but we're going to spend a few more minutes. What were you interested in growing up? At what point did you take interest in the faith for yourself? How did you end up in Pittsburgh? What are these? Okay,
so Pittsburgh was a matter of college. That's where I went to college, Carnegie Mellon, and that's where actually Linda and I met. And that was driven simply because at some point in high school, I was trying to decide between things that were more artistic and things that were more mathematic, and architecture seemed to be a nice blend of the two. So it wasn't so dry as engineering. Sorry, engineers. And it made more money than artists. So
sorry, artists.
So, it seemed like a good middle ground career path, and really. Today, as a father, my boys are like have switched majors at various times. It's amazing to me that I could have stumbled upon a career path that literally you study it and you practice it. I'm now more than 40 years in this, and I love it. It's weird that you can make that choice that young professionally and still do it. Like when you were talking about being an apprentice and then putting that into practice, and how many people are still doing what they were trained to do. I'm still doing what I was trained to do, and I wouldn't have it that any other way. I still get excited by seeing a new building go up and seeing somebody take the keys to their new house and things like that. So that's really cool. In terms of my experience at church growing up, quite honestly, my experience growing up at churches it was more of a social type of thing. It was very light on theology and teaching. I'm not being overly critical. I mean, that is what it is, and that's at the time I thought I was a Christian. I didn't understand what really being saved was until Christ ultimately enters your life for real. And that didn't happen to me until sometime in the 90s. And that's when I was here. I'd already gone through here. I had kids, and I've shared my testimony here at church on multiple occasions. And really that awakening was part of wrestling with the disabilities of my daughter Dana. Some people, sometimes I'm jealous of those people that can say, well, I remember the day when I was here at a particular location and the hour and who was speaking, and I know exactly when I was there. That's not me. I remember feeling it's kind of like flying through a cloud bank. You're moving somewhere. You had a sense of where you were, but you don't really know where you're at until the clouds clear and you can look and you can start seeing some landmarks and getting your sense of bearing again. So I knew where I was once Christ entered my life. I had no idea he wasn't there already until I really realized he was there and the clouds cleared. I don't know if that makes sense or not.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And so you touched on after college, you and Linda came back to New Jersey. You're at the Presbyterian Church. Had you already had Dana?
Yes, Dana was born, and in 1990, we were still members over there at the Presbyterian Church.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about Dana's condition, what that's been like, and how you ended up transitioning churches to FUMC Collingswood.
Well, Dana's
First Methodist. You want it?
Dana's now 34. Now, when she was born, we didn't know that there was anything wrong as an infant, and then she started these weird kind of behaviors, which of course she wouldn't do when we brought her into the pediatrician. It's kind of like your car doesn't make that noise when you bring it in to the mechanic. So back then, I remember we splurged and we got a compact VHS video camera, huge thing, to take home movies kind of thing. Now it's on your phone. But it wasn't until we did that and we actually videotaped some of these things that the pediatrician said, "Nah, you're right, that behavior is not normal." It turns out she was having seizures as an infant. And that's not good because infants, their brains are not fully developed.
Sure.
And when you have seizures, that's basically the electrical wiring in your brain. It's not firing the way it's supposed to fire. It's not good for adults, but adults can come out of it and still think and have clarity. For an infant, as they're developing, that can cause serious permanent issues. And they didn't know what this was. They had no idea. They did all sorts of tests. They had no idea exactly what her issue was. We know now that it's actually an ultra-rare genetic malfunction. It's called GRIN, G-R-I-N. And there's like one piece of code that didn't cross the T's and dot the I, and that's all it takes, which is a sermon in of itself of how the language of our DNA is such that it can't possibly happen by accident.
Yeah, that still blows my mind because it's a very different condition, but with Meg's LGMD, it's just one place where it should be a C and it's an A.
Yeah.
And all the billions of letters and the lines of DNA code, one letter switched.
And we only found out about what this was since the time that they actually mapped the human genome, which hadn't been done when she was born. So
Right.
that they didn't have the ability to even identify this thing. So we went on a whole different path of different doctors and neurologists and medications and injections and all sorts of things. Was not the typical parents of a newborn experience that you would have. How that relates ultimately to what you were asking about church-wise is she didn't develop the way normal kids developed. And pretty soon she was still in the nursery, but she was like 4 years old. She's a big kid to be in the nursery. And it wound up being that the staff there, the volunteers, they came to us and said, we really don't know how to care for her during the nursery time. Want her to be here, but one of you are going to have to kind of be here with us. Now, that was the only hour in all week long that we had to be together in church service, and to say, well, if we're going to do that, they didn't mean to reject us.
Yeah.
But that's what happened. That is what happened in retrospect. And then our neighbors next door, we live a couple blocks here from the church. 2 doors over was where Pastor Escher used to live. Mm-hmm. It was one of the church parsonages. And in between us were Lynn and Jay Herman. They're stalwarts of this church. And they kept inviting us, and we kept saying no. The only Methodists that I knew was my maternal grandmother. And growing up, she would take me to her church. And this is where all those blue-haired old ladies went. And literally must have been 50 or 60 years of age difference between my sister and myself when we would go. And the next youngest person. We were like the only children in the church. And it's like, I'm not going to a Methodist church.
But you did.
But we did.
Why? What was that?
Well,
finally, tipped the...
Part of it was Lynn and Jay next door. They were good friends of ours. They wound up being Max's godparents. Mm-hmm. That's how close we got. What they kept doing was saying, just come out. They didn't stop. And they would talk to us about this thing called GSC that is here, mm-hmm. God's Special Children. It was a class that was really for people like that. And then Dana was clearly the youngest and smallest at the time. A lot of those special children were adults, and they're even older adults now. But that was something that gave us a little bit more confidence after basically trying to go independent and not mm-hmm. do church for a while.
Sure.
Then we wound up coming here sometime around 95, I guess, was about when we first started coming here. And as I said, at that point in time, I don't think I was saved. I was still flying in the clouds. It wasn't until maybe a couple of years later with some solid teaching here and some a lot of reinforcement and other parents of kids with disabilities. Mm. Pastor Escher had a daughter with Down syndrome, Janelle, the Robs. I mentioned before, the Duns. I mean, there had already been a kind of a core group here that both had handicapped kids, but they didn't live life like, they were victims of some awful circumstance. Every time I had interacted with them, it was nothing but joy and yes, struggle, mm-hmm. but they weren't defined by struggle. They were defined by something else, and that's pretty cool. I'm doing all the talking. Do you guys?
No, that's the point. That's why it's going to be called the Steve episode.
They hear us talk all the time.
Yeah, no, I'm taking it because parts of this is it's the first time I'm hearing this, and so just taking it in and appreciating how God's led you to this moment. What would you say in the past 30 years? This will be your anniversary, roughly 30 years roughly. Here. What would you say? And I'm sure GSC might be the go-to answer in certain seasons, and people are usually the easy cop-out. And you can use those and be maybe more specific, but what's kept you here for 30 years?
Wow.
Yeah, because I haven't been anywhere for 30 years.
Have you even been alive for 30 years?
Yes. Yes. But, we've talked about it before, since Meg and I got married 19 years ago, this June, the longest we've lived anywhere is about 3.5 years. So the idea of living in one place, being connected to one faith community for 30 years, there's got to be something that kind of sticks out to you.
Well, there's the practical things. The things like when you have a child with disabilities, change is very, very hard. Mm-hmm. So to give something up that she's gotten accustomed to is just very difficult and requires a lot to break the inertia of that. That said, there have been multiple occasions, and I've shared this with you, Scott, from almost the day you got here, where I've had my resignation letter written. I was 9.5 toes out the door, just because of various circumstances.
They invited us to dinner when we first got here and said, hey, we want to have you over for dinner and tell you all about the church because we're leaving.
I do. I remember
that was our first conversation.
Yeah.
That was before he asked me to be church council chair. Actually, I was already church council chair at that time. Look, as I spoke about on Sunday, there's no limit to the frustration that many of us feel in terms of the drama and conflict within our denomination. And I've had times where I've just been done. And it's really interesting that there have been times that Linda has been done, but we've never quite been both done at the same time.
Yeah.
There was one time when I know that she would have definitely wanted to go, but we're committed to being part of a church family together. And I had certain obligations, and I wasn't feeling the same way, so I would carry her through that. Mm-hmm. When you're coming here, it was the opposite way around. I was asked to be church council chair for one vacant year of the prior chairman's term because he's leaving. You came during my 5th year.
Right.
Because of all this stuff going on, and I was done.
Yeah.
And Linda was okay with going. And then she met you, and she met Meg, and I remember her coming to me saying, just kind of like shaking her head, saying like, Steve, I don't think it's time yet. I think God's doing something different. We just got to kind of stay and let's see where it goes. And he's always been faithful through that. He doesn't promise us a wonderful ride on the roller coaster. Well, we did get a bit of a roller coaster ride, but he's always been there with one of us, and then he used our marriage to kind of keep us both together. And yes, the stability for Dana is an important thing. So that's one of the reasons why we stay.
And so, kind of with all that in mind, what are some of the things you see God do? You said you noted, like, Linda noticed at one point that there was something new happening. It was a different sentence than she'd had before. What are some things now that you see God doing that either encourage you or get you excited or fill in whatever that blank is?
I really think that where we're at today has so much potential. In the past few years, I've seen some new people come in. Prior to that, the years were more defined by the slow departure of one after another. It looked and it felt like it was in decline, and it was. The last couple of years have been, I think we're defined by people coming in as opposed to people going out, and that's great. And with new people coming in, there's a certain new energy. And I do think that I really do see the clouds clearing in our denominational struggle, and I do believe that we've got a great opportunity to rethink what church is. I've been in denominational churches all my life, and tradition and structure are wonderful things to a point.
Yep.
But tradition and structure can also hold you back from being flexible and responsive to the opportunities that the Lord puts in front of you. And I think that coming out of the shared trial that we've all kind of been through or are going through, I think we're at a place where we don't have to be dominated and fixed in one location or one spot by all that is in the past, all that we're used to. I think we're going to be more open to new things. I pray we're going to be more open to new things because I believe that God wants the church to be out there, responsive and doing things. He wants us to be more flexible and fixed. Yep. And that to me, I think is exciting because in conversations, I know that there are people that want to do that. I also know that there are people that are just, they don't think it's possible for them anymore. They might feel that they've either been there, done that, or maybe they just don't have the energy that they used to or whatever. But the Lord can use everybody at every age. I tried to make that clear on Sunday that, if you can hear me, you don't have a ticket in the stands. You got to be in the game. And I really think that we, as a church, can really be in the game and doing things. I'm looking forward to reinventing what that looks like.
Yeah, I think one of the things I've noticed in the past few years with denominational struggles in other churches and here is that there's no longer the opportunity to be passive about your faith and what you believe and why you go to church and what church should be. And so the intentionality of what are we doing and why are we doing it it's not just for the people in council to figure out, but for like people in the pews and they vote and they choose with their attendance of, whether they want to be intentional about where we're going as a congregation. And I also really appreciate you sharing how it wasn't all rose-colored everything the past 30 years. Well, small side question, how many toes are out the door currently?
Oh, I don't think that I'm inside the door at this point.
Incredible. I know if just like the pinky toe is sticking out. But I think sometimes I haven't been around. I've been on this earth for as long as you've been at this church. And so...
thanks for that.
You're welcome.
Thanks for bringing up such a painful memory. Next time, give me a paper cup, put lemon juice on it. We're closed.
You're welcome.
You know where that's from.
I have no idea, but I'm going to give you the credit for it.
Princess Bride.
Oh, I've seen The Princess Bride. I don't remember.
The Crystal.
I mean, it's been, I don't know how long since I've seen that movie. Anyway. But thinking of, seems to be, for me, a more recent trend of once you don't like any aspect of a church, you then just move on to the next one. And so I think it's a testament of staying through seasons when it isn't the easiest for personal reasons or congregational reasons or whatever it may be, and being committed to a congregation, but also at the same time being open to potentially where he's leading you and your family to go next or at what point to leave, because sometimes I think it's I'm most comfortable. I've been here for 20 years. How could God use me or me be more fruitful anywhere else and just stay in a single place? And so, I really appreciate you sharing that. And I'm also curious now that we're... What's the time? What are we doing on time? We're doing great. I feel like there's so much more to learn about Steve, and I don't want to miss any of it. But what more immediately comes to mind to buy me time, and maybe if something else comes to mind, I'll rearrange the order. Do you have any questions for us? We always leave it open of personal, theological, church-wise, anything that may come to mind while you have both of us. And a microphone.
And a microphone. Wow. So, I'm actually going to think about that in the back of my head for a minute while I respond to something else that you said, because I think you're right that, especially today, we live in a very disposable society.
Yeah.
The very notion of something that you're committed to it just seems anathema to what most people think. And I think a lot of the now I'm going to sound old, the younger generations, that's even worse because they've been brought up with a greater focus on technology, a greater focus on things that are disposable. The very notion of committing to things. And I'm not the only one that thinks that. There's plenty of studies out there about how, just in general, I'm one of the last of the baby boomers, but in general, a lot of the younger generations, they just don't do institutionalized anything.
Yeah.
And it's all experiential, which is okay to a certain point, but it lacks a level of commitment to it. And I think that, and I say the same thing to folks when they ask me how I've been at the same firm for 40 years, and don't I ever get bored about designing housing? And it's like, no, because there is something precious about being able to go deep into something, as opposed to just scratching the surface, going wide, and getting so many different experiences. I'm not saying that that's wrong, but if that's all you do, you never get to experience going deep into anything. And certainly in life and business and other things, that's valuable. And your faith walk, that's critical, because otherwise you'll stay at that apprentice level, and all you're going to do is observe a bunch of different things, and you're never going to get deep. One of the things that we didn't talk about, except at the beginning, was really my experience with the Saints Prison Ministry. And I mentioned that on Sunday about how literally was at a missions conference. I'm debating with God. It's like, I'm going down my checklist of reasons why I can't, and he's just kind of like brushing them away every step of the way. And that goes to the other discussion of staying when it got hard. My intense involvement in the prisons with the active mission came at the same time that I was having some personal struggles here with the church. And it was my brothers on the Saints team, and that aspect compensated and filled a void that I otherwise would have probably succumbed to here. So one of the things that, so I'll get to the question for you guys. You thought I forgot. You thought I forgot. And it goes to this whole notion of experiential type of stuff. For a church that's so very mission-minded and mission-committed, which we are, we always have been, it's just amazing to me how few of our members have really gotten out and gotten engaged personally. Have they prayed? Yes. And that's a wonderful thing. Have they financially supported? Absolutely. But I've been in classes with people who have been at this church for as long or longer, and I talk about my time with the Saints, and I say, well, you've been on a missions trip. Who's been on a mission? And nobody raises their hand. Yeah. Because they've heard about it, but they always stop short of going for whatever reason. And I think as we think of ourselves as a new church, reinvent, not that I want us to be surface level experiences, but how do you guys, as the young pastors, I'll include you both in that because you're both younger than I am, how do you take a group like this that is pretty well velcroed to our seats and get them out of those seats and get them engaged and out in doing the work?
I'll let Scott talk about what Scott does. I'm kind of blessed, but also have the weight in which, it's a lot harder to teach an old dog new tricks, but I got all the pups. So I got our youth and our college age and our young adults. And so trying to build a culture that service is a regular part of it for our youth. Then we try to do that as varied as possible, from joining GSC, God's Special Children Within Our Walls, to going to local nonprofits and helping, to raising money for 30-hour famine and helping hunger around the world, and within that helping in the food pantry here, to also creating mission trip opportunities in the summer, whether it be Harrisburg we did last year, going to Mexico. And so trying to make it not seem as intimidating and get them more comfortable in those places and serving and see the fruit from it. Because every single time they're more excited about other service opportunities. And I think hopefully with the work of probably what Scott may be sharing and missions committee and all of that, that we can continue to work on new opportunities for our broader congregation to get more regularly involved in hands-on ministry in the area. But yeah, for me, it's forming a culture at a younger age where that's the regular. So when our kids go to other churches and they say, oh, well, we just send the money, we don't really do much, so we're like, why? So that it's more foreign to them to not be.
Not that the money's a bad thing.
No. It's
You
extremely important. The money, the prayer, like, we have no idea how much. We rarely get to see the fruit of our prayers, especially for missionaries far, far away, because we don't know, right, until we get to heaven, we don't know which prayer, helped nudge or whatever it may be, something that God wanted to do and was working on within their ministry. So it's harder to see that direct connection, but even monetarily, all of the people that, like, for example, I think of the Cherries at the Black Forest Academy in Germany, where for me, I see them as like missionaries for missionaries, because they're essentially making it possible for missionaries around the world to send their kids to a safe Christian environment to grow up and learn. Yeah, for whatever various reasons, whether it not be dangerous or like a dangerous area that their parents are currently serving in, or they're not allowed in the public schools because they're Christians, and therefore it's hard to balance the ministry and, raising and teaching your kids. And so by the Cherries being there and being funded, it makes it affordable and possible for the missionaries that are also raising their funding to be able to have that for their kids. And so, we're able to support and make so much possible. And God can use that money much better than we could use it on our own via our Amazon Prime shopping list.
It's definitely something, this idea of getting our people more out, more in service opportunities, more on mission. It's definitely something that is on my heart, and I want to see happen more and more. And it's interesting. From time to time, I'll have conversations with people, and they'll come up and they'll be like, I'd really love to see our church do X, Y, and Z. And I look at them, I'm like, okay. And they look at me and say, so when are you going to do that? I'm not.
You should repeat that I think it was one of your first sermons when you first got here, the Home Depot sermon.
Yeah.
You can do it.
Yep.
You can help.
Yep. Yeah, and that, I mean,
you thought
maybe not quite in those words, but that is my response.
No, you were.
It's, we're looking for people to lead those kind of things. And that doesn't mean that, if you lead this one project, you become now the project coordinator for every mission outreach we do. But if you've got a heart for that, I'd love to see you take it and run with it. And, maybe you need to go check it out yourself first and then invite some people in to join along with you. Because I think that's really where our growth and transformation happens. Transformation kind of happens at the pace of relationship. Mm-hmm. As we interact with one another, as God speaks to us through one another and through us to others, that's where the rubber meets the road and the iron sharpens iron, and we become more of what God intends for us to be in relationship together. And so, something that we've been talking about a lot over the last few weeks, couple months, is this idea of building a rule of life. Something that provides some structure and intentionality to our lives. And I think a key component of that everyone should think about as they're thinking about how do I order my life to reflect Christ in the world is service. We all need to have those opportunities. We all need to sometimes even build in that intentionality because, I'll tell you what, at least for me, with a full-time job and a wife and 4 kids, if stuff doesn't get scheduled, if it doesn't get planned, it doesn't happen. Right. Yeah. It doesn't get done. And so if I just wait to have some spare time and the energy and whatever else I need for a service opportunity or a mission engagement to happen, it's never going to happen. And so I have to choose to build those things into my life, whether that's weekly or monthly or whatever, because otherwise it's not going to happen. And mission is so close to God's heart that it should be close to our hearts too.
Thank you for that, for responding to that one. Let me give you another question.
Uh-oh. You looked at me with that.
No, I'm actually looking at you both because,
Yeah.
I mean, as you both, one of the reasons I'm here is because you asked me to do the sermon this past Sunday, and nobody threw stuff at me, so I guess that's something. But I spoke about a new beginning, a new church, regardless of whether we are in this building. Mm-hmm. If we're just the same church in this building, but not with the word united in our name, or if we're the same people outside of this building, but we still hold on to the same rule of life, which is show up, attend, listen, that kind of thing. How do we make sure that the new church isn't just old church 2.0? How do we prioritize that to be intentional, to make sure that we don't, it's going to be so easy to fall back into old habits.
I think the church can't stay the same no matter where we are in the process, names, all that kind of stuff, if the people are constantly transforming into the image of Christ. And so I think these classes, this sermon, that like all of the areas in which we are being very intentional about people growing deeper in their relationship with Christ and letting him transform their lives, the congregation as a whole, in let's say a year from now, should be drastically different than now or a year ago or 2 years ago. And I think even in the limited time I've been here, I've seen a drastic shift in a good chunk of the congregation where people are just having much more intimate relationships with God. And I think the outflow of that is what they desire and expect when we're together as a community of believers. And so, there's always going to be temptations to go back to certain things for the sake of comfort. But I think I've seen a lot of people desiring something new because they've experienced something new in their relationship with God.
I think there's a lot of truth to that, and I'll just interject for a moment, because when I reflect back, you asked about my experience. I remember those early years when we just started this new thing called small groups, and again, it was Jay Herman next door who invited me to a small group and there's some people that are still around that were in that group. I remember telling him I'd go. I was met on his back deck. One condition: you asked me to pray out loud. It's the last time you'll see me.
Yeah.
That was my one condition. That's where I was. So when you talk about people growing, and then the more they grow in Christ, the more they're likely to put that into action. The thought of preaching,
Yeah.
where is praying out loud compared to carrying a Sunday morning sermon? Those are in different hemispheres.
Yeah.
And that progression for me that I've experienced here in this church, from that to then being part of the leadership of that small group, then teaching adult studies, responding to a call and going across the country into prisons and preaching, learning how to give my testimony, learning how to give a concise gospel message. I don't always take 45 minutes. In a prison, it's got to be 5 minutes or they blow the yard time. All of that stuff, that's all part of Christ working in an individual. And just, I rarely reflect on it in that way. But that's what you're talking about. If you get people doing that, they can't stay in their seats. They just can't.
Right. Because organizations, and a church is an organization on some level, an organization changes when the people within the organization change. And so the people within the church changing, growing, maturing is, inevitably going to keep our church growing and maturing. And I think Jeremy said something in there about being intentional. I think that's a key part of it. The stuff that we've been wading into the changes we've made over the last. None of that has been done just kind of willy-nilly.
Let's add something to the church schedule because there's an opening.
Right.
Let's keep that program going because we've been doing it for years.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is, as hard as it was to come in July of 2021, as COVID was still kind of tail end, in a sense, it gave us a clean slate coming in to say, all right, well, we're not doing anything other than worship right now. What are we going to do?
And you actually had the advantage that you were not the cause of the disruption.
Right.
Everybody had already been disrupted.
Right.
And there's a certain kind of esprit de corps where nobody was immune to that disruption. Every church, every workplace, everything was disrupted in that way.
Yeah, so I didn't have to
you started out in that context. So
I didn't have to be the bad guy who came in and shut down a bunch of stuff. It was already shut down when I got here.
You had the benefit of a longer honeymoon period, baby.
What do we bring back? When do we bring it back? So I think that intention is a key part of it. But then also I think we've got to stay sensitive to the leading of the Spirit, the voice of God. Keep tuning our ears, keep joining together in prayer. I think that's key. And then
I'm actually going to hop in because when he says we, it doesn't just mean Pastor Scott and I as a congregation.
Absolutely. And that's what we're trying to do on Tuesday nights and Thursday mornings is just get us as a corporate body more in a position of prayer where we can hear from God and intercede on behalf of our church and our community. I think that's a key. And then the last one I would say is we got to stay humble. We have to stay humble because I think the tendency when we start leaning into some of these things like spiritual practices and rule of life and we hold and have held a high view of Scripture here. The tendency, the temptation maybe, can be to get to a point where we say, well, we've got to figure it out, and we're growing because of it, and begin to look down on other people, other churches, whatever it may be. And I think we've got to keep a posture of humility, recognizing that anything good that comes out of our cooperating with God is because God's cooperating with us, and He's the one who's doing the work, and it's not anything that we do. Scripture says that all of our righteousness is like filthy rags, but God can take that and He can bless it and He can use it for the sake of what He's doing. And so I think that intentionality, that listening posture, and staying humble, I think are three keys for us as we move into the future.
I'll give you one last shameless plug. Because you mentioned the prayer initiative.
Yeah.
There you go.
And I mentioned on Sunday that I think Linda and I might be the only people that have been to every single one since it started.
Yeah, because now with my trip recently, I've even missed a couple.
And and actually I'm flying out to Tennessee on early Thursday morning, so I'll miss Thursday morning. But for those that are listening and thinking about that prayer initiative, those prayer gatherings, they really are nothing like what we've ever done here before. The whole experience, my preconception of a prayer meeting, and we've done them where you sign up for a half-hour slot, or prayer vigils, and we've done prayer meetings where you basically sit around and you share your prayer concerns, and then everybody closes their eyes and you repeat all the prayer concerns, as if somehow God wasn't listening the first time. And look, there's nothing wrong with that, but that's been the default experience. And this is so very different because it's not about the baggage that you bring through the door and the concerns that you bring in. It's about the Scripture and the focus on that. And I'm pretty impatient when I read. I don't dwell and chew on like 3 passages unless for some reason I'm studying it for teaching. But to be part of a prayer initiative where, you're reading 11, 12 verses, staring deeply into these, and then you're quiet and you listen to what's being said back to you, and it's just very, very different. And I think that if people will come out, look, it's not the Super Bowl, but you come out and you're open to this, I think they'll be amazed at what God will say to them and through them. And I honestly believe that new church we're talking about, it doesn't have to wait for all this dust to clear. Build the foundation now and build it here on prayer.
Yeah.
That kind of prayer.
Yeah.
Not just a quick off the top of your head blessing or whatever. That kind of depth is something that I find to be very rare in the 30 years I've been here.
Yeah.
Well, that's our conversation for today, but that doesn't mean the conversation is over. We'd love to hear your thoughts on these topics as well. To ask a question about anything we've discussed in this episode or to join the conversation, you can head over to fumccollingswood.org/podcast. Thanks for being part of this conversation.